Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have on board as our guest, Dr. Karen Dolan. Dr. Dolan earned her doctorate in clinical nutrition through Maryland University of Integrative Health, through which she also earned a postmaster's certificate in clinical herbalism and a master's of science in therapeutic herbalism. She is also certified in holistic aromatherapy through the West Coast Institute of Aromatherapy and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Virginia. Dr. Dolan is a board-certified nutrition specialist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. She also serves as a Virginia Regional Director for the National Association for Holistic Aromatherapy. She's an author of several peer-reviewed articles and recently published a case report in Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine entitled Managing Hashimoto's Thyroiditis Through Personalized Care, and she discusses a case from her nutrition practice. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Dr. Dolan.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellen.
So I loved reading your bio, and actually we've crossed paths a lot in certain ways because I was teaching a course, in fact, at Maryland University of Integrative Health in the clinical herbalism department, and also I am a peer reviewer for the alternative therapies in health and medicine. So I'm so happy to see you up and coming and getting involved in all these great organizations.
Oh, thank you.
Now let's go back in time. What made you decide to put your time and energy into becoming certified in these holistic modalities?
Well, I think it came from a time period in my life where I was, I think, looking for really holistic and integrative care for myself. I think kind of as you go through adolescence and getting into college, I found that, at times things might seem a little bit more difficult or stressful, especially at the university level, and I didn't really have excellent tools for myself for self-care. So that got me interested, and as I dug more into things that I could do to help nourish myself on a regular basis, I realized how much of that is missing now from the conventional approaches that we use to help people learn how to care for themselves.
And a lot of it is missing, unfortunately.
Yes, it is.
So one of the things that I actually am very focused on at this point in my career is making the things that you know are true, evidence-based medicine, to make them be standard of practice in mainstream, because truthfully, that is good medicine and that is prudent medicine.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
So therefore, it's your job to do that because you're up and coming, right? And I've been doing this since 1964.
Yes, you're paving the way for all of us who are up and coming, I think. So thank you.
Right, so I'm mandating a job for you to take it to where it's not just outside of mainstream, it is mainstream.
Exactly.
Because with all your study, this is the correct evidence-based approach for people to really get well.
It's true, and it's interesting how we see that in other traditions, medical traditions around the world, that ours is relatively unique here, and that we've attempted to take a lot of these things out. But I think as we've moved forward, it's kind of the pendulum is swinging back in the direction where more and more research is coming out showing how important all of these different uses for botanical medicines, for herbal interventions, for personalized care, how critical that is to health.
Now, in terms of that term, functional nutritionist, what is a functional nutritionist?
So a functional nutritionist, it's interesting because you yourself, being an herbalist, know that we have a tendency in Western herbalism the idea is we look at the entire terrain, look at all of the different factors that are going on and underlying what might be an imbalance that that person is dealing with, and then we address those underlying factors. And essentially, that's what this functional medicine model and functional nutrition model is doing, looking at those different inputs, the things that go in to your daily life and your health, and working on those levels to be able to help restore healthy function.
Well, that's a good way. So what does function mean, though, when we say functional?
So what we mean are things like the process by which you might build healthy tissue, right? So, or the process through which we might support the functioning of a mitochondria. We know that these different organelles, these different biochemical processes in our body require certain nutrients in order to work. We know that in order to get glucose into the cell and to be able to actually break it down, we need magnesium. If you don't have it, then you're going to, at times, have symptoms of insulin resistance when it's really a magnesium deficiency. So functional is looking at those actual building blocks and addressing those to make sure that we can function in the way that we are intended to function.
That's an excellent explanation. And one of my other goals as part of making this kind of medicine standard of practice is I really believe there's so much evidence for everyone to have a vitamin and mineral assay done regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Because so often, just what you said, Dr. Karen, is true, that someone might need magnesium instead of, let's say, an antidepressant.
Yes, that's right. It's true.
And it's so much less expensive if we talk about, cost.
It absolutely is. And I think especially if your practitioners are trained in being able to take a look at those assays and being able to interpret that data in light of the clinical presentation. And that is one area that I hope that we can move even further along as you're teaching these courses is helping practitioners and even conventional medicine practitioners learn how important these things are and how to interpret that data.
Well, I'd like our listeners to know that you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Dr. Karen Dolan, and she is a doctor of clinical nutrition, board-certified nutrition specialist, and she's talking to us today about making personalized nutrition a standard of care. I love that topic, especially the word standard of care, because that goes into conventional medicine. That's how they function. They look at a sheet, and very often, regardless of what the individual practitioner thinks, they have to follow the sheet, which is, if someone has a symptom, give them a drug. And that's a different approach than you're taking.
That's correct. It is. It's interesting because a lot of times we go through in an effort to understand the condition or the disease, we break it down to its smallest possible parts and kind of look at it and see if we can find the one factor that's the cause and give a drug for that factor. But the data shows that actually there are a lot of different factors that go on, a lot of complexity. And it's important for us to be able to understand what's unique for the individual.
Well, I know that you have such a broad background and you bring together your interest in psychology, which I imagine it looks like it was your first degree. So you were interested in human psychology early on. And then you brought in very specific training in botanical medicine and other natural therapeutics.
That's right. Yeah.
So how do you see those working together?
Well, so I'm so glad you asked me that because I find that one of the things, even when we get into functional nutrition and or integrative health practices, and I don't know if you see this, Ellen, is sometimes we kind of we start forgetting the importance of the individual's feeling about what they're doing, their way they think about what they're experiencing. And so, if you look at some of the existing research, kind of talking about the role of stress and the role of allostatic load. This is something that, Bruce McEwen and Peter Sterling have written a lot about and talked about the importance of making sure that we manage the burden of stress in a way that a person can function. And if someone's stress level is so high that they, kind of in chronic over time, they lose functionality. So psychology is really critical in helping to understand how a person might be dealing with the consequence of a particular intervention, and how can we adjust it to meet that person's needs and meet that person where he or she is. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And really, we're all one being. It's always interesting to me that the traditional medicine, and when I say traditional, I mean Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Western shamanistic practices, they all view the individual as a whole being, where the physical and psychological are viewed as one piece. And yet in conventional medicine, we can also call that modern or allopathic medicine, they actually break it apart. I went with someone to a rheumatologist the other day, and she told him she had headaches, which was probably secondary and an adverse effect of one of the many medications she's on. And he said, well, I can't deal with that. I can only do your joints. He actually said that to her.
Wow.
Which is true. That's how he practices. Don't tell me about a headache. That's not your knee.
Right.
Unbelievable.
It's so interesting. And that's a really great example, because that's where we come back to that functional nutrition model, or just the model that, as we mentioned, is a traditional model, that all of these things could be related. And often they are. They all come back to the root and to the, the base of what's happening with that person. So that could be something as, as central as a gluten intolerance, which a lot of times people don't think of as, causing inflammation in the knees or joints and causing headaches. But absolutely it can.
Well, I want to remind our listeners they can find you at nourishwell- is it llc.com?
That's correct, yes.
nourishwell-llc.com, and Dr. Karen has a beautiful website there. Now, what are some of the tools that you use to look at how you might personalize recommendations?
Okay, well, absolutely. I think as we're coming into there are a lot of tools that have come out, actually, from a modern biomedical standpoint, that are really helpful in my practice. So not only do I look at the terrain, as we talked about, that person's story, I look at their biomarkers, their laboratory biomarkers, but I also look at nutritional genomics. I do analysis on the data that we can pull from someone's DNA and how that person might uniquely utilize certain nutrients or be vulnerable to certain dietary approaches, having it be either more effective or less effective. And I incorporate that as well into my practice.
So what are some of those tests that you might do that perhaps most people haven't experienced?
Well, it's really interesting because, there's something called Opus 23, which is a tool that I use a lot, which has come out of the Center for Personalized Medicine in Bridgeport. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, Ellen, but it really is my preferred tool for analyzing nutritional genomics data. And one of the ways that we do that is we can take information that we've gotten we can use 23andMe or Ancestry.com or Genos, and they're actually developing a unique chip right now that will have more information that we'd like to pull from saliva. But people will, kind of give their vial of saliva and have that run on it for often an ancestry analysis. But we can take the raw data and use that to take a look at some of these factors that might be affecting their diet and lifestyle.
So the Center for Personalized Medicine, you mean in Bridgeport, Connecticut?
Yes, that's right.
As part of the naturopathic school?
Yes, well, so Dr. Peter Diadamo
who I know very well, right?
Yes, he's the developer for the Opus 23 platform, and I've compared it to several others that are out there, and this is by far my favorite.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Yes, I know Dr. Diadamo many, many years, and my radio partner, Dr. Eugene Zamperone, was actually the person who interned under him when he was first writing his book on how different genetic factors and ancestry influences food choices.
Yes, yes.
So I know him a long time. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we have to take just a 1-minute break right here. on Herbally Yours, and I'd like to remind you that you are listening to